welcome back to the Intimaphilion. I'm your host, Miranda Barnes, and this is a podcast where we discuss insects, culture, and some of the interesting ways they intersect. On today's episode, we are going to be venturing into politics. Now, in an era that I would hazard to say is somewhat politically fraught, one might ask how on earth state insects get designated in the first place. Why on earth state governments are taking time to designate state insects when they could be doing, literally anything else. And the answer to that question is that I would say about 90% of the time, state insect designations are championed by elementary schools, which, though not to throw shade at literal children, is probably why some of their picks are straight up garbage. sorry. But yes, historically, a lot of state insects are brought to the legislature by kids as kind of a safe, non-controversial way to learn about political engagement and maybe to feel a little more connected to the natural world and lobbying for their chosen critter. However, as one might imagine, A, there were a lot of adults that had the opportunity to weigh in at different points in these processes, and B, most of the children that would have been involved are probably older than I am now. Therefore, I feel absolutely no compunction about raking some of these choices over the coals. Now, I'm going to be doing this as a tier ranking, which, if you're familiar with that format, is a little unusual for a podcast, given that you don't have that fun visual component where I get to actually physically slot each state into different tiers. So because that element is absent, we're not going to be going through the states one by one and tier ranking them in real time. We're going to be going through these in order of their tier ranking. And I only have 3 tiers. So I'm really breaking down the original concept here, but here we go anyway. These are our categories. S tier for amazing state insects. Perfect, would not change anything. These states knew exactly what they were doing. Then there's A tier for state insects that are, to me, acceptable. Like, it's a nice enough choice. Not particularly inspired, but I get it. And then we have F tier for choices where I look at them and I think to myself, you took the time to pass this into law to establish this as the state insect? Seriously? My extremely scientific and precise rules for determining what goes into each rank are as follows. Firstly, the closer to being endemic the insect is, in other words, the insect is found in that state or roughly in that state's region and nowhere else, the better the state insect. Because, if you're choosing a symbol of your state, you should pick something that reflects the unique character of the land you're living on. And nothing captures that better than an endemic species, in my opinion. By the same logic, if it's an introduced or non-native insect, automatically minus points, even if those states are maybe offering a more accurate symbolic representation of how we interact with our environment, but that's getting into some dark territory for our silly little tier ranking episode. Anyway, secondly, if you're going to be picking a state insect, you'd better be giving me a specific species here. You know who you are, Delaware, Massachusetts. And though I'm not going to take points away from states that pick butterflies, which is a pretty significant portion of them, especially if we're lumping the state butterflies into this tier ranking as well, I will be assigning extra points for originality. Assigning extra points, like I'm actually scoring any of these in an objective way. Without further ado, I think we've got to move on to our S tier state insects. And for that, I think there's no better place to start than California, the very first state to establish a state insect back in the year of our Lord, 1972. The California dog-faced butterfly, Zerene eurydice. It's a beautiful yellow butterfly. The males of these have dark patches along the edge of their forewings that gives it that dog-face name, as well as the alternate name, the flying pansy. Yeah. But we're not just about aesthetics here at the Intimaphilion. I will not be ranking these insects based on how beautiful I think they are, although I will occasionally comment when something stands out to me. But anyway, what makes this an S tier state insect? Obviously, California gets points for being the first to ever do it. Plus, the idea for making the state insect the dog-faced butterfly was originally floated by the Lorquin Entomology Society in 1929. So obviously, California also gets points for listening to scientists, even if it was actually only enacted into law 43 years later at the behest of, you guessed it, some very passionate 4th graders. But California is one of 2 states that can claim that their state insect is actually completely endemic to their state and their state only. Truly, this little guy could not even be in the running anywhere else. If I were giving this podcast as a presentation to a live audience, this would be the point where I would ask you to guess what the other state is. I mean, you have a, 1 out of 50 chance of getting it right if you guess randomly. 1 out of 49 even, because you know I'm not talking about California anymore. Okay, you've had your chance. The other state that falls into this category is, as you might expect, Hawaii. I mean, they're probably comparatively spoiled for choice as a geographically isolated island state with a lot of endemic species, but they picked the Kamehameha butterfly, Vanessa tomamea, as their state insect. Amazing choice! The adult butterfly has these beautiful patterns of red, orange, and black on its wings, and its caterpillars have these funny hairy faces covered with yellow-tipped bumps. They remind me a little of being a pimply teenager. If only I had turned into a beautiful butterfly. But what I think is even better about this butterfly, being Hawaii's state insect, is that it's in decline. This is probably due in part to the introduction of invasive species, both predators that the insect hasn't evolved to deal with, and new plants that have displaced the native nettles it normally likes to feed on. Why does that move it up on the tier ranking? Well, the fact that it's the state insect makes it easier to publicize efforts to restore and study this species. For example, through breeding programs or through initiatives like the Palela Hua Project, asking citizen scientists to help track butterfly sightings. Another great thing about the Hawaii state insect is that it references a historical figure of significance in the island's history. Kamehameha united all of the islands of Hawaii into a single kingdom. So moving on, although I can't say that Maryland's state insect is only found in Maryland, I think that the Baltimore checker spot, Euphydryas phaeton, hits a lot of the same beats in terms of what makes the Kamehameha butterfly so good for Hawaii. There's a state-specific historical component to the choice as well, since its common name comes from the orange and black checker spots on this butterfly's wings, which resemble the hues on Lord Baltimore's heraldic shield. Lord Baltimore being the British guy who helped to establish the colony that would eventually be Maryland. And the Baltimore checker spot is also on the decline in the state, meaning that its official status offers a really great starting place for conversations about conservation efforts. And while we're here, let's give S tier to a few other states that have chosen to bring attention to some taxa in serious peril. We have the Karner blue, Plebagis melissosymulus, as the state butterfly of New Hampshire. It's experienced serious declines due to reductions in populations of its host plant, wild blue lupine. In Minnesota, we have Bombus affinis, the rusty-patched bumblebee, which is its state B, our first non-butterfly state insect this episode. Minnesota, let's go! I'm so proud of you. I'm not going to go into much detail on all of the factors affecting that particular bee, though if you're interested in information on bumblebee declines, please see episode 1. But I just want to say as an aside that I love that this is specifically the state bee, because I think that just establishes a great precedent for designating a state dragonfly, a state silverfish, a state beetle, a state scorpionfly. The sky's the limit, truly, truly. Speaking of state beetles, we also have to give it up for New York and its state insect, the 9-spotted lady beetle, Coccinella novumnotata, or C9 if you want to pretend that you're a suave secret agent instead of a graduate student whose only experience with spycraft comes from living in an apartment with the thinnest walls known to man. Unfortunately, New York state insect is kind of a sad story because it was probably pretty common when it was first designated, but there aren't any substantial populations of this lady beetle left in the state. It's thought that it may even be locally extinct, although there were apparently a few reported in Long Island in 2011. What happened to it? We don't know for sure. Part of it might be changing landscapes. Ironically, reforestation in the Northeast may have eliminated some of the open farmland that these ladybugs had previously been thriving in. It could also be due to competition with non-native ladybugs introduced for biological control efforts. Regardless, although it's not completely wiped out in the US, clearly its special status has not been enough to promote conservation or save populations in the Empire State. But, on a somewhat brighter note, let's congratulate Rhode Island for making their state insect the American burying beetle, Necrophorus americanus. What is it burying, you might ask? Well, carrion. It's a type of carrion beetle. In other words, hecking metal choice, Rhode Island. But it's not as grisly as you would think. Burying beetles are actually somewhat unusual among insects in that both male and female beetles stick around to help care for their offspring, which is really sweet. Anyway, sadly, as you might have guessed, they're also in decline. It's difficult to say what factors are hurting these guys the most, but like a lot of these insects, it's probably due to habitat loss and fragmentation, especially new patterns of carrion distribution that favor furry and feathered scavengers over these cool beetles. It may also be the types of carrion available. It's not like these beetles are huge, they aren't burying a whole deer or anything, they're typically targeting rat-sized critters. Some people think that they used to depend on passenger pigeons as a major food source and haven't really ever recovered from the extinction of those birds. But as much as the Rhode Island state beetle acts as a reminder to protect this insect, it can also be seen as something of a celebration because this beetle was actually downlisted in 2020. It's still under threat, but it's no longer endangered. And Rhode Island actually played a major part in that recovery effort. When they were first listed, Block Island, that's an island off of Rhode Island, not a secret, separate, additional state. The Block Island American burying beetle population was one of 2 known remaining populations, so they set up programs to breed burying beetles there and release them elsewhere in New England. So let's go, Rhode Island! Now that I've just gone through a whole bunch of great state insects that are sadly in decline, I think I need to clarify that just to discourage any states from intentionally putting their insects in decline to try and make my S tier here. I need to clarify that a state insect does not have to be in mortal danger to make the S tier. Let's take a look at Indiana with the Say's firefly, Paractomena angulata, another iconic non-butterfly state insect. Indiana's a bit late in the game. I believe it was the last state on this list to designate a state insect, but when it finally got down to it, it came in so strong. And the Indiana Department of Natural Resources is pretty hecking proud of itself, too. To quote their website directly, Say's firefly is native to North America, the United States, and Indiana. Many other states have insects that are not native to their areas. Damn Indiana, throwing shade. But to top it off, they even picked an insect named after a famous entomologist who lived and died in Indiana, Thomas Say. Although, does he count as a Cusier if he was born in Philadelphia and discovered this very firefly in Philadelphia? I don't know, Indiana. New Mexico isn't doing too shabby either. Firstly, they're out here picking another stunning state butterfly, the Sandia hairstreak. Again, not endemic to New Mexico, but hitting the spot in terms of being a not very common insect with a limited range. And I have to say, not to be biased, but in terms of appearance, I think this is one of my favorites. It's a beautiful green and orange little guy that lives in the Yucca Agave Desert. And honestly, I kind of tear up reading this joint memorial they wrote about this butterfly. The Sandia hairstreak symbolizes the ability of New Mexican residents to thrive year-round in a semi-arid climate, where different years bring floods and droughts, and where the terrain is beautiful, but rugged. Like, I'm not from New Mexico, but I feel the patriotism flooding through me. And then that patriotism is replaced with confusion and intrigue when I then read at the bottom of the document that the Wild Friends dancers should be commended for raising public awareness of the butterfly with their original dance presentation entitled The New Mexico Gossamer Wing. Excuse me? Where can I find a recording of this dance? When are they doing it again? Do you mean to tell me that they did a whole show to promote this butterfly and I didn't even get to see it? Lastly, Florida. Oh, wait. You're telling me that New Mexico has another state insect? You're telling me that they made the tarantula hawk wasp their state insect? You mean the wasp that paralyzes tarantulas and then lets their larvae eat them alive? You mean the insect whose sting was rated on the Schmidt Index as being so painful that only the bullet ant could possibly top it? Okay, look, I'm sorry. They win. New Mexico wins state insects. Packing my bags and moving there right now. But no, I've got to stick to my graduate degree here in Florida. Oh, Florida. Despite Florida being such a major hotspot for entomologists, yes, really, we don't actually have a state insect, but we do have a state butterfly, and, I think it deserves to be S tier. Heliconius carathonia, the zebra longwing. It's not endemic to Florida, but of the US states, I think you're probably more likely to see it in Florida than anywhere else. And admittedly, part of the reason I put this as an S tier insect for Florida is for sentimental reasons. I had never seen one in the wild until I came down here for my graduate school interview. When I saw them flying around, I knew that it was a promise that Florida would have all kinds of awesome, wacky, never-before-seen critters for me to get to live with and interact with and study every day, and that was awesome. Anyway, obviously, if Florida really had a state insect, it would be the love bugs. No, kidding. Besides, that would break the rules, since they only started appearing in Florida around the 1950s. If you know, you know. Maybe I'll do a whole episode about the love bug sometime in the future, since there are some crazy local urban legends about them here. You know, give them the Mothman treatment. But if I'm giving Heliconius S tier for Florida, I guess I have to give Maine S tier for the pink-edged sulfur, Coleus interior, as its state butterfly. It's kind of a similar deal where it has a very northerly distribution, so although Maine isn't the only state you'd be able to see this butterfly in, you're certainly more likely to see it there than you are here in Florida. And I guess that means I should also bump up Colorado for the Colorado hairstreak, Hyperotis chrysalis for similar reasons. Though, did anyone tell Colorado that just because it has Colorado in the common name doesn't mean you've got to make it your state insect? No? No? Okay, sorry, never mind. And while we're at it, let's shout out the Diana fritillary butterfly in Arkansas, Sphaera diana, as well. It also has a relatively limited distribution, and it's suffering from habitat fragmentation, as well as off-target effects of treatments for spongy moth caterpillars. Listen to last episode for a short discussion on those little guys. It's not in as dire straits as some of the other insects we've talked about, but, you know, state insect treatment certainly can't hurt. So with that, I'm afraid we're moving down into the A tier. Like I said, I have nothing against these picks, but I think you'll agree they just pale in comparison to some of the stuff that came before them. Like Sheridan's hairstreak, Calliphris sheridanii for Wyoming. It's okay, I guess. Not bad. Not sure what about it screams Wyoming, except maybe that it was discovered there, in Sheridan. And I guess that General Philip Sheridan did play a pretty major role in the early history of Yellowstone, real big chunk of which is in Wyoming. Yeah, I guess this one's great on me. But Montana, another Yellowstone Park having state, also picked a butterfly to represent itself, Nymphalis antiopa. I confess I have mixed feelings about this one. I mean, it is native to North America, technically, but it's pretty broadly distributed globally as well, not really unique to that region of the world or anything. But I had my emo phase in high school, and I'm not going to deny that the common name mourning cloak is edgy as heck. So, you've got me there, Montana. Louisiana with the Gulf fritillary, Dione vanilli, similar deal. I mean, they're beautiful. I love seeing them. Nothing wrong with having that as your state butterfly. Just, you know, it's not something that specifically screams Louisiana at me. I want to give a little more credit to states that picked non-butterfly insects, like our 3 Odonata respecting states. That's dragonflies and damselflies, for those not in the know. We have Alaska's 4-spotted skimmer, Libellula quadrimaculata, Washington's Anax junius, green darner, and Nevada's vivid dancer damselfly, Argia vivida. Again, you know, they're fairly common outside these states as well, but you don't really see any other legislatures claiming them for their own, so, I mean, let's go for it. I'd take a dragonfly over a butterfly any day. Cover your ears, Flora. Shh, shh. I didn't say anything. Meanwhile, in Beetleville, we have North Dakota with Hippodamia convergens, the convergent lady beetle. I'm not giving them points for creativity per se, but at least they understood the assignment, you know? They chose a specific species, and they chose a specific native species. And really, that's all I can ask for. Similar deal with Photurus pennsylvanica in Pennsylvania, which, again, good for you for picking a non-ladybug beetle, but after Deanna, I mean, the justification just pales in comparison. Like, okay, it's called the Pennsylvania firefly. Is that it? Is that the best you could do, elementary school students? Just because it has Pennsylvania in the name. I'm having flashbacks to Colorado right now. But low-key, these fireflies are kind of firefly. Sorry, I think I just lost my single listener with that one. Anyway, Photurus fireflies are cool because they're femme fatales. They lure males of other species in by mimicking their flash patterns, and then eat them. And I mean, that's pretty metal, so even if I'm not sure what that says about Pennsylvania, I like the energy. Now, you thought we were done with butterflies in A tier. We're not, yet. But this is the point in the podcast where I start unofficially disowning states of their state insects, so just needed to get that warning out there for the fragile-hearted among you. Because now we hit the states that just shamelessly started cribbing off each other's notes. I mean, I love the eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly as much as the next girly, but we have 6 states designating Papilio glaucus as their state butterfly or insect. Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, Delaware, North Carolina, and South Carolina. No, Your state insect has got to be unique to your state, okay? I don't make the rules, but I mean, I am making the rules here. Obviously, no one is following them, but I am making rules. But only one of these contestants gets to keep eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly as their state butterfly. If we're going by seniority, it would have to be Georgia, because that's the state that actually selected eastern tiger swallowtail first in 1988. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to pull the strings and give this one to Alabama, because they also made the eastern tiger swallowtail their state mascot. In the Senate bill where they described that decision, they mentioned that part of their justification was celebrating the opening of the Day Butterfly Center, which I think is pretty cute. And, I mean, we can't take their mascot away from them, can we? Of course, no homage to the eastern tiger swallowtail will ever top the boll weevil monument in Enterprise, Alabama, but since boll weevil is invasive, that would technically break the rules I made about non-native insects being ineligible. The boll weevil statue, a topic for yet another episode, to be sure. Meanwhile, we have Tennessee and Mississippi just narrowly avoiding eastern tiger swallowtail plagiarism accusations with the zebra swallowtail, Euratides marcellus, and spicebush swallowtail, Papilio trolleus. And, you just know that Arizona and Oregon would also be picking eastern tiger swallowtail if they extended that far west. Instead, they ended up with a two-tailed swallowtail, Papilio multicaudata, and the Oregon swallowtail, Papilio machian oregonius. And New Jersey and Oklahoma both tried so hard to avoid eastern tiger swallowtail that they too ended up with the same butterfly, black swallowtail, Papilio polizines. And though I matriculated from a New Jersey university, I'm sorry, but I have to give it to Oklahoma. They got to it first. And of course, if the eastern tiger swallowtail was a bit too popular in some of these states, you know that the monarch butterfly, Danaus plexippus, is going to be pretty hotly contested as well. Now, I've heard some people complain that monarchs shouldn't be considered state insect material because they're migratory, so it's not even a resident in a lot of these states for very long. But I feel like this is kind of like when a state lays claim to a celebrity who happened to live there for a little while, Indiana and Thomas Say, anyone? Anyway, Illinois got to it first, so Idaho, Alabama, Minnesota, Texas, Vermont, and West Virginia are just going to have to seek solace in other state insects. I gave you eastern tiger swallowtail already, okay, Alabama? Don't get greedy. And last but not least, in A tier we have Kentucky pulling up here with the viceroy butterfly, Limonitis archippus, as its state butterfly. As if to say to all those states picking monarchs that, well, Kentucky, she's not like the other states. Kentucky is so different, you guys. So now we move into the most damning tier, F tier. We've actually seen some of these states before because they've designated multiple shades of state insect. State insect, state butterfly, state agricultural insect, state mascot, Alabama. But don't think, because I thought you had at least one decent state insect means you are safe. Yes, I'm looking at all of you, European honeybee fans, Apis mellifera stans, Arkansas, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, New Jersey, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Alabama, Utah, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. Oh my God. Look, guys. I get that the honeybee is really important as insect livestock. But my dudes, that's not even a native insect. And all of you wanted to have it for yourself. Shame. And some of these state designations are embarrassing. New Jersey with your state bug being a honeybee. Honeybees are not bugs. They are not members of the order Hemiptera, with all the stink bugs and wheel bugs and spittle bugs and what have you. It's one thing for me to colloquially call things bug, but it is another thing entirely to codify it in state law. Embarrassing, honestly. And don't think I'm ignoring you, Alabama, who thought you could be super special and sweet by picking the queen honeybee to be your state insect. No, not acceptable. If I had my druthers, there would be only one state that could keep the honeybee as its state insect, and that's Utah, because they literally have a beehive on their state flag. They are the beehive state. That's a level of commitment we just don't see elsewhere. I still think you should pick an insect that we didn't introduce, but, who am I to deny you, Utah, if you're gonna go all the way? I have a similar gripe with Connecticut on the non-native insect front, with their having picked Mantis religiosa, the non-native European mantis, as their state insect. But the good children of Connecticut are already working to right that wrong. In fact, we actually have two opposing schools working on this problem. One lobbying for the autumn meadowhawk, a dragonfly, Cypetrum fascitum, and the other for the spring azure butterfly, Celestrina ladon. I mean, not to throw my hat into the ring, but you do also technically have Stagmomantis carolina in Connecticut, and that's a native species. It's kind of towards the upper end of its range, but you could hypothetically find it there. You know, if they're super attached to having a mantis as the state insect. Except, oh wait! South Carolina beat you to it! And I guess that you probably have a more legitimate claim, since it is the Carolina mantis after all. Moving you up into A tier, South Carolina. Sorry I missed you earlier. Now, I'm going to take a special moment to pick on Delaware here. We already dished Delaware for following the crowd and picking the eastern tiger swallowtail to be their state insect, but that wasn't enough for Delaware. Oh no. They also needed to have a state bug and a state macroinvertebrate. But your state bug is the ladybug? My dude, my bro, I don't even know where to start with that one. Firstly, not to retread the ground I just covered with New Jersey, but ladybugs are not bugs, and the order Hemiptera, they are lady beetles. Not to be pedantic. Who am I kidding? Yes, to be pedantic. And to make matters worse, ladybug describes a whole family of insects. Come on, Delaware. You can do better than that. Which ladybug, Delaware? Which one? I don't see you trying to get away with exactly the same scam, Massachusetts. Now, I do like the state macroinvertebrate thing, and I extra like that they picked a stonefly. But hey, wait a minute. Stoneflies are a whole hecking order of insects, Delaware. That's like saying my state bird is a waterfowl. Well, which one? A duck, a goose, a swan? No, sorry. All of them. My state bird is all waterfowl. That's what you're doing, Delaware. Boo, 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 boo. Now, for all of the states that I just said should redesignate their state insect, and for Iowa and Michigan, who just never threw their hats in the ring, I just want to end by asking, what is the purpose of a state insect? I mean, as I said at the beginning of the episode, a lot of it is just getting children engaged, both in politics and maybe to a lesser extent in entomology. But it can also mean so much more than that. You know, having state birds or state insects or state rocks or whatever can feel kind of silly. But when these insects represent something important about the state, when they're features of the landscape that are important to people, that people want to save, to protect, I think these designations remind us that, goofy as they are, as residents of these states, we're also stewards of the organisms that live there. And they're just as much a part of the local character as we are. And I think particularly in a world where I feel like we live more and more on our phones and we're not touching grass as much as we used to. Maybe state insects can be ambassadors to some of the unique and amazing natural places across the country we've become so disconnected from. Even if it is just the eastern tiger swallowtail for the 1 bajillionth time. Anyway, thanks again for tuning into the Intimaphilian. I know this episode was a little different, a little less narratively structured maybe than the previous episodes. Please don't tell me if you liked it or disliked it more than previous editions. I don't want to know. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends and with your state legislatures. And maybe with elementary school children, you might know. Not really. And certainly do not share it with my employer. Thank you. That's all. Goodbye.